Hello there. In this video, I'm going to start off a little differently and give you a precious gift. I'm going to start with a quote that I would like for you to ponder. In fact, for the balance of your life. Write this one down. It should remain with you till the moment you die. It's from A.W. Tozer, who said this: "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." This is the most consequential statement I think you'll ever hear in your life. You should memorize this and, like a dog on a bone, figure out what it means to your life. Okay, in today's video, we're going to examine the New Testament, focusing on its authenticity and historical reliability. That's what we're talking about. Its authenticity and historical reliability. I will tell you that this is something that has been dealt with by very smart historians for centuries. We're not really going to spend a lot of time here in this video because the evidence supporting the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament writings is so voluminous, so overwhelming, that there's simply no way to make a credible argument to the contrary. No way at all. And if this subject were not totally necessary to cover for later reference in a future video, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, I would just tell you to Google it and find out for yourself. However, it is important for your journey that you feel confident knowing that the writings contained within the New Testament are authentic and historically reliable. And I'm going to give you a quick heads up about the video following this one. You see, much like the way God designed the Old Testament to be a self-authenticated collection of writings, as you learned in the last video, He also designed the writings in the Old Testament to authenticate Jesus. It is truly astonishing how He did it, and I want you to learn this. We will discover who God said Jesus was, what Jesus was, and if you don't know, why He was called Christ. Not just that, but we will, through logic, reason, and rational thought, learn and discover how we can know this authentication was truly from God and what it means in your life. But before we get to all of that, we need to first establish the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament. It's important, so we're going to do it. So, the authenticity of the New Testament refers to its authorship and the claim that it contains first-hand accounts and eyewitness testimonies of the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The historical reliability of the New Testament pertains to its trustworthiness and accuracy of its contents in depicting the historical, cultural, and social context of the time period in which the events took place. Only after we've determined the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament can we test to see if this story about a man who claimed to be the Son of God can be authenticated as the inspired Word of God. So let's authenticate this collection of books and letters called the New Testament. The New Testament is a remarkable collection of ancient texts, most of which are about 2,000 years old, that starts with 4 Gospels, books written about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the book of Acts, which covers the development of the early church for about a 30-year period after Jesus was crucified, the epistles, which are letters sent to churches and individuals and groups of people by the different apostles, and the book of Revelation, an apocalyptic vision of the end of days. This story takes place in ancient Israel during the 1st century when Israel was under the rule of the Roman Empire. Now, very quickly, I'm going to give you a few definitions. The first one is disciple. In the context of the New Testament, a disciple refers to a follower or student of Jesus. An apostle. The term apostle comes from the Greek and simply means one who is sent or messenger. In the context of the New Testament, an apostle refers to someone who is chosen and commissioned by Jesus to be His authorized representative and to proclaim the message of the gospel. Epistle. An epistle is a formal letter. In the New Testament, the term epistle refers to letters written by various early church leaders, including the Apostle Paul, to certain specific individuals, Christian communities, or a wider audience of believers. Finally, there's the term gospel. Gospel comes from the Old English word Godspell, which means good news or good tidings. In the New Testament, the Gospels refer to the 4 books that narrate the life, teachings, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. All told, the New Testament consists of 27 books. The process of selecting and recognizing which books would be included in the New Testament took place over several centuries and involved various factors. Early on, there were numerous writings circulating within the early Christian communities, including Gospels, epistles, and other texts. The criteria for inclusion in the New Testament canon generally revolved around apostolic authorship or association, orthodox content, widespread acceptance, and conformity to the teachings of Jesus and the apostles. Now let's begin the process of exploring the topic of the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament writings. Our research will encompass an analysis of several crucial factors. Actually, there's 4 main factors that we're going to touch on today. First, we will examine the manuscript evidence supporting the New Testament. Next, we'll examine the eyewitness testimony in the Gospels and other New Testament writings. From there, we will examine archaeological findings that provide corroborating evidence and valuable insights into the events, places, and characters described in the New Testament. Lastly, our research will also extend beyond the New Testament itself. We will explore early sources outside of the New Testament writings, evaluating the references to Jesus, early Christianity, and the historical context in which they emerged. So let's begin with the manuscript evidence. This process examines the surviving handwritten copies of the original writings. In the case of the New Testament, scholars have access to a considerable number of manuscripts which provide valuable insights into the transmission and preservation of the text over time, which leads us to the art and science of textual criticism. Textual criticism is the scholarly discipline that aims to establish the most accurate and reliable version of a text by comparing and analyzing different manuscript copies of that text. For example, consider the writings of Plato, one of the most influential philosophers in ancient Greece. While Plato's works are highly regarded and have had a profound impact on Western philosophy, the manuscript evidence for his work is relatively scarce. We have around 200 transcripts of Plato's works, and the earliest copies date from over 1,200 years after the original composition. This significant time gap raises doubts about the accuracy and reliability of the texts we possess today. Can we truly be confident that we have an accurate representation of Plato's original thoughts and teachings? 1,200 years is quite a gap. Now let's contrast this with the New Testament manuscripts. The New Testament boasts an astonishing total of about 25,000 manuscripts, encompassing various languages such as Greek, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, and more. Among these, the Greek manuscripts alone number over 5,800. This abundance of manuscripts provides an extraordinary level of support for the New Testament's textual reliability. Not just that, these manuscripts cover a wide expanse of time, with some fragments dating as early as the 2nd century, a remarkably short time span from the original writings. This proximity to the original composition sets the New Testament apart from any other ancient texts, affirming its historical credibility and demonstrating its unparalleled manuscript tradition. The sheer quantity and quality of the New Testament manuscripts allow scholars to engage in rigorous textual criticism, comparing different copies and variations to reconstruct the original text with a remarkable degree of accuracy. The fundamental message of the New Testament remains intact throughout the entire manuscript tradition, which simply means what you're reading in the New Testament, any of the books, is exactly what was actually written. Now, in light of these facts, it becomes impossibly difficult to dismiss the New Testament as an unreliable or fabricated collection of documents. The manuscript evidence overwhelmingly supports the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament writings. Unlike any other ancient text in the entire history of the world, the New Testament manuscripts surpass all other ancient texts in terms of manuscript support, time proximity, and linguistic diversity. In fact, the evidence is so vast and compelling that no credible historian, professor, critic, scoffer, no matter how badly they want to, can credibly refute the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament. And that's just a fact. Finally, One significant discovery that greatly impacted our understanding of the New Testament are what's known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Discovered between 1947 and 1956 near the Dead Sea in the region of Israel, these scrolls comprise various Jewish texts, including biblical manuscripts dating back to the time of Jesus. The Dead Sea Scrolls provide historians with valuable context for understanding the religious background in which the New Testament writings emerged. The next step in our process is to evaluate the eyewitness accounts in the Gospel, the first 4 books of the Bible. These books include Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and hold a significant position within the New Testament as they provide first-hand accounts of the life and ministry of Jesus. Matthew and John were chosen disciples of Jesus and were with him from the very beginning of his ministry. It's pretty well believed that Mark transcribed his book from Peter's dictation. Peter was chosen as a disciple on the same day as John. Luke was not a disciple, but instead acted as a historian or investigative journalist and went far and wide to interview witnesses that had been closely associated with Jesus or witnessed various parts of his ministry and wrote his book through their eyes. The inclusion of eyewitness testimony ensures that the events recorded in the Gospels have a direct connection to the life and ministry of Jesus, lending credibility to their authenticity and historical reliability. One interesting aspect of these gospel books is that they don't try to polish the story of Jesus or of themselves during their time with him. They show all the foibles that were present with the disciples, including some of the boneheaded things that they said and did. It gives a real sense of authenticity. Now, if you've never read any of the Gospels, I would recommend you start with the book of John. The next step is the study of archaeological findings. There are many different archaeological discoveries that align with the narratives and events described in the New Testament. Excavations conducted in various locations have unearthed artifacts, structures, and inscriptions that shed light on the historical and cultural context of the biblical accounts. The next step is to examine some of the earlier sources of external corroboration that help to establish the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament. Josephus was a Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century. He's best known for his work, Antiquities of the Jews, where in it he refers to Jesus as a wise man, a doer of marvelous deeds, and the leader of a group of followers. He also includes a brief mention in his book of James, who is described as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. This and other books by people outside of the church or its influence add historical reliability to the New Testament writings by providing outside confirmation of the people and events that occurred during this time and this place. Now, so far we've examined the manuscript evidence supporting the New Testament and found that it is overwhelming. We examined the eyewitness testimony in the Gospels, the archaeological findings that provide corroborated evidence and valuable insights into the events, places, and characters described in the New Testament, as well as the corroborating early sources outside of the New Testament writings that confirmed the existence of Jesus and the early establishment of Christianity and its historical context in which they emerged. Credible historians throughout the centuries, no matter how grudgingly they may have done so, have formed a universal consensus that attests to the authenticity and historical reliability of the New Testament. Of course, that merely brings us to the point where we can say, so what? Again, it's kind of interesting. Just like the Old Testament, the stories are fun to read. The story about a renegade preacher in Israel 2,000 years ago is interesting, and admittedly, there are some pretty colorful characters in this story. Yeah, that Jesus guy, he sure angered the establishment and got executed by his Roman overlords for his troubles. But in what way does that impact my life, your life, 2,000 years after the fact? The simple answer is, it doesn't. No more than the fact that another man in that story, John the Baptizer, lost his head for challenging the Israeli king about his choice of a wife. Unless the creator of the universe did, for some reason and in some supernatural way, authenticate this story and make it applicable to my life. Now, if that's the case, well, then I should sit up and pay attention, as should you and everybody else. As I explained in our last video, the most obvious way that God authenticates his word to mankind is through the fulfillment of his prophetic word. It isn't just obvious, it's utterly and reliably predictable, which means that if we're paying attention, we won't miss it if we're paying attention. The things that God whispered to his prophets and what those same prophets proclaimed to the world is of paramount importance to mankind. It is through the fulfillment of these prophecies that we can rely on the Word of God and find comfort in knowing that his word to us is reliable. Interestingly, in the case of the New Testament, this authentication via prophetic word is actually found in the life and person of Jesus, the main character and subject matter of these authentic and historically reliable New Testament writings. And this is where we will pick up in our next video. But before I leave you, I want to leave you with this quote. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Keep that in the forefront of your mind until our next video, where we will pick up from here and discover how God demonstrates and establishes his inspiration of the New Testament writings through the authentication of the person of Jesus of Nazareth. You don't want to miss the miraculous and unmistakable way he did that just for you. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please share it with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and be sure not to miss the next video where we talk about the person of Jesus of Nazareth. I'll see you then.